Loved You Better Than You Knew by Mrs. Alex McVeigh Miller. Copyright 1897, now in the public domain. Chapter 5. Retrospection. I remember I was young once, how long ago it seems, since the happy days and months passed away like pleasant dreams. For I loved then, I can smile now at myself 'twas long ago, ere time's hand had sprinkled snow to cool love's fever on my brow. Rosalie Osborne. Everard Dawn's words fell on his sister's ears with a great shock. So deep was the anguish of his tone and the emotion of his face, his lips trembling under the rich brown beard, and his eyes gleaming under their heavy brows, like shadowed surfaces of deep blue pools, while the pallor of his face was ghastly to behold. She studied the agitated man in wonder and terror, for he was almost like a stranger to his sister, having never met her since he was a youth of 16, just entering college. Since she had married in Virginia while on a visit from her home in the far South, her communications with her relatives had been almost broken off. The death of her father soon followed her marriage, and her only visit home had been to the deathbed of her stepmother when Everard was just entering college. She was his only near relative, and she had urged the lonely boy to visit her often, but he had never accepted the invitation but once, having to work too hard at his chosen profession, the law, to find time, he said. Their correspondence had been infrequent, and she knew little of him, save that he had been married twice, and that on the death of his second wife he had brought her his child to raise and gone away abruptly, a broken-hearted, lonely man. Yet, as she looked at him sitting there, so handsome still in his young, splendid prime, with threads of premature silver creeping into the thick locks on his temples, and remembered how heavily the shadows of grief had stretched across his life, the woman's heart was moved to pity and tenderness, such as she had felt in his babyhood days, when he was the pet and darling of all. Her cold gray eyes softened with sympathy as she cried, "Surely, Everard, you have had more than your share of sorrow in life. What new trouble is this? For of course you would not oppose such a splendid match for your daughter without grave reasons." He lifted his heavy eyes to her troubled face and answered bitterly, "Yes, I have reasons, grave and bitter reasons for forbidding this marriage, and I thank heaven I came in time to prevent it. But ask me nothing, Rebecca, for I shall never willingly divulge my reasons, not even to the man whom I must send away sorrowing tomorrow over a broken love dream." His voice fell to exquisite pathos, as if he almost pitied the man he intended to wound so cruelly. Mrs. Flint was disappointed, crestfallen. She had been so elated over her niece's prospects. She rejoined uneasily, "I don't know what Cynthia will say to this. Her heart is set on Arthur Varian. He stands for everything she longs for most, and her hatred of her life with me is intense and rebellious. You can never reconcile her to it again." "I must make a change in it, then, though my means are not large," he sighed. "So much the worse, for she loves luxury and pleasure, and her heart is almost starved for love. You know I have a reserved nature, Everard, and never pet anything. I have brought her up kindly, but rigidly, and she resents my discipline and your neglect almost equally." "Poor girl! Perhaps she has cause. I have certainly almost forgotten her existence in these years of exile. But what alleviation was there to my misery except to forget?" he cried passionately. "Poor boy," she sighed, forgetting that he was 45. She was 20 years older, and to her he appeared young. He made a movement of keen self-scorn. "I don't deserve your pity," he cried. "I have been a coward, shifting my burden on your shoulders, hating to come home, weary of my life. But at last the voice of duty clamored at my heart. I remembered you were growing old, and that the child was almost a woman. I came at last, but even then reluctantly. Can you ever forgive my fault?" Many times she had said to herself, in her impatience of Cynthia's discontent, that she could never forgive her brother for saddling her with the care of a child in her old age. But at the sight of him, so sad, so broken, so self-accusing, she could not utter the words of blame that at first had trembled on her tongue. She answered instead, "What could you have done with a girl child? And I was the only one you could turn to in your trouble. But I must warn you that you will not find an affectionate daughter. You have been away so long that she scarcely remembers your face, and she has chafed bitterly at your neglect. I suppose that is natural, and I do not think we shall ever be very fond of each other," he replied with strange bitterness. "When do you wish to see her, Everard? She is in bed now." "Do not disturb her sweet dreams. Our interview can easily wait till tomorrow," he said, with strange coldness for a man whose nearest tie was this beautiful, neglected daughter. He got up and stood with his back to the fire, his pale, troubled face in shadow. "Don't let me keep you up longer. You look pale and tired, poor soul," he said kindly, adding, "Can you give me a bed, or shall I go to the hotel?" "I can give you a room," she answered, lighting a bedroom candle for him and leading the way to a cozy downstairs chamber. "Good night. I hope you will sleep well," she said, leaving him to ascend to her own quarters opposite Cynthia's own little white-hung room that she took much pains in beautifying after her girlish fancies. She peeped in at the girl and saw that she was wrapped in pleasant dreams, for the murmured name of Arthur passed her lips, and she smiled in joy beneath the gazer's troubled eyes. "Poor little girl," she murmured as she withdrew, her heart heavy with sympathy for the sweet love dream so soon to be blighted by the father's stern edict of separation. "It is very, very strange, the way Everard takes on about it. Why, he went wild just at the very name of Varian," she said aloud to the large portrait of her long-dead husband, Deacon Flint, good soul, that hung over her mantel. She had acquired a habit of talking absently to this portrait, as if it were alive. She read her short chapter in the Bible, mumbled over her prayer, and crept shivering into bed. But slumber was far from her eyes. The events of the evening had unstrung her nerves, and she lay awake, dreading the dawn of the morrow that was to usher in such disappointment and sorrow to the sleeping girl now dreaming so happily of the lover who was never to be her husband. Chapter 6. Rebellion. Cynthia would have slept later than usual that morning, but for her aunt's hand gently shaking her as she said, "Get up, Cynthia. Breakfast is almost ready. Put on your Sunday gown and try to look your best when you come downstairs." Is Arthur here? Already?" cried the girl, a beautiful flash of joy illuminating her face. "Never mind about that. Only come down as soon as you can, or the biscuit will be soggy," returned the old lady, hurrying out in trepidation. The sight of the beautiful, happy face made her nervous. Cynthia hurried her toilette, not taking time to plait her hair, but letting the bright mass fall in careless waves over the brown cloth gown, her Sunday best. "How ugly it is!" she cried, with an envious glance at Mrs. Varian's finery spread over a chair. Then she sped downstairs, wondering happily if Arthur had indeed arrived so soon to ask her aunt's consent. But a strange man, tall, grave, brown-bearded, stood with his back to the fire, scanning her with moody blue eyes as she fluttered in, and Aunt Beck said in nervous tones, "Your father, Cynthia." "Oh!" she faltered, in more surprise than joy, and paused irresolute. "What a pretty girl you have grown, my dear," said Everard Dawn, coming forward and giving her a careless kiss. Then he took her hand and seated her at the table, saying laughingly that her aunt had been fretting about the biscuits. No emotion had been shown on either side. The man seemed indifferent, with an undercurrent of repressed agitation. The girl was secretly wounded and indignant. Her own father! Yet he had never shown her a sign of real love. Between this pair, her poor heart had been starved for tenderness. A little triumphant thought thrilled her through and through. "What do I care for his coming or going now? I shall soon be happy with my darling." She was wondrously beautiful this morning, even in the plain dark gown that simply served as a foil to her fairness. Everard Dawn could not help from seeing it and saying to himself, "What peerless beauty! No wonder Arthur Varian lost his head." He felt like groaning aloud. His sudden homecoming had precipitated him into such a tragic plight, for the task that lay before him was most bitter. He could not help from seeing the pride and resentment in her eyes, and something moved him to say, apologetically, "I dare say you have been vexed with me for staying away so long, Cynthia. But I have been working for you, trying to lay aside a little pile so that you could enjoy your young ladyhood. You shall have pretty gowns and pleasures henceforth. Are you not glad?" It cost him effort to say so much, but there was no gratitude in his daughter's proud face, only a mutinous flash of the dark eyes as she answered, "I shall not need your belated kindness now." "What do you mean?" impatiently. "Haven't you told him, Aunt Beck, about Arthur?" blushing vividly. Yes, dear." Cynthia nodded her head at him with a mixture of childish triumph and womanliness. "You see," she said proudly, "I am going to be married soon. I shall have a husband who will give me all I want, even," bitterly, "the love I have missed all my life," tears sparkling into her eyes under the curling lashes. He felt the keen reproach deeply and exclaimed, gently and sadly, "Poor little Cynthia." "Not poor now," she answered quickly. "It is rich Cynthia now, rich in Arthur's love and the certainty of a happy future." She meant to be scathing, poor, neglected, wounded Cynthia, but she could never guess how the words cut into his heart and tortured him with secret agony. He who meant to lay her love and hopes in ruins, to blight all the joys of her life by the exercise of a father's privilege of breaking her will. But no shadow crossed his face, no trouble was apparent in his manner, as he laughed easily and answered, "Nonsense! You are scarcely more than a child yet, too young to be dreaming of marriage. I shall send you to school to complete your education before you can begin to think of lovers." "I will not go," she said rebelliously, with startled eyes upon his inscrutable face. "Cynthia," reproved her aunt. "I will not go," the girl repeated defiantly. "I shall marry Arthur as I promised before Christmas." She sprung from her seat and rushed to the window, drumming tempestuously upon the pane, her habit when greatly excited. Outside, the prospect was dreary. The debris of yesterday's storm littered the grounds. The limbs of some of the trees hung broken. The sun was hidden under clouds that hinted at snow. Mrs. Flint whispered to her brother apprehensively, "I told you so. She has a rebellious will, and she thinks you have no authority over her now, because you stayed away so long." "She will find out better about that before long," he answered decisively, though the curious paleness of last night settled again upon his handsome face. He went over and stood by Cynthia's side. "It will snow before tomorrow," he said quietly. "Yes," and she looked around at him with a flushed face, crying, "Oh, Papa, you were jesting." "No, I cannot give you to Arthur Varian, Cynthia. You must forget him, my dear child." "I cannot, will not. I should die without him," passionately. No, you will soon get over this fancy, for you have known Mr. Varian but a little time, and tomorrow I shall take you away from this place, and amid new surroundings you will forget the face that dazzled you here." "I will never forget Arthur, nor will I go away," she protested. "You cannot set at naught a father's authority, Cynthia." "I disclaim it. I defy it. You have given me neither love nor care, so you forfeit every right. Oh, I am sorry you ever came back here," stormed the angry girl. Cynthia, come and help me with the work," her aunt called sharply, and she left him with the mien of an offended princess. He took refuge in a cigar and smoked moodily till the click of the gate latch made him look up, with a face working with emotion, and a handsome, elegantly clad young man walking up to the door. Cynthia had gone upstairs to make the beds, and her aunt went to admit the caller. In a minute she ushered him into the little sitting room, saying nervously, "Mr. Varian, my brother, Mr. Dawn." Chapter 7. The Fates Forbid It. Arthur Varian gave a slight start of surprise as he was presented to Mr. Dawn, but the latter, more prepared for the encounter, bowed with gracious courtesy, frankly shook hands with the visitor, and pushed forward a chair. Then they looked at each other silently a moment, and that glance prepossessed each in favor of the other, a natural sequence for Arthur since he guessed that his new acquaintance must be Cynthia's father. They conversed several moments on indifferent subjects, both rather grave and constrained, with a feeling of something serious in the air. Then Arthur came to the point with manly frankness. "I have found you here most opportunely this morning, Mr. Dawn. I came to see Mrs. Flint on a particular subject, but of course you are the proper person to consult," ingratiatingly. "Cynthia has already told me of your suit for her hand, Mr. Varian," gently helping him out, as if anxious for it to be over. "You know, then, that I love your daughter, that she has promised me her hand. I can give you every assurance, sir, of my possession of those requisites every good man wishes to find in a suitor for his daughter. I am rich, of the best blood of the South, my character irreproachable. May I hope to have your approval?" He spoke diffidently, yet eagerly, and with superb manliness, his dark blue eyes shining with hope, his cheek glowing with honest pride that he had so much to offer to the lady of his choice. Without vanity, he knew that he was, in worldly parlance, an eligible parti. No thought of refusal crossed his mind. Yet Everard Dawn was slow in replying to what many might have considered a compliment. His eyes rested steadily and gravely on Cynthia's lover, while his cheek paled to an ashen hue, and the hand that rested on his knee trembled as with an ague chill. Arthur Varian noticed these signs of deep agitation, and attributed them to parental love. He added gently, "It seems cruel to harass you almost in the first moment of your return with this matter, but it is not as if I proposed taking Cynthia away from you immediately. We had planned for a Christmas wedding." "This is the 1st of November, Mr. Varian," he reminded him coldly. "Yes, sir. So it would be almost 2 months before I took Cynthia away," smilingly. "My daughter is too young to marry yet. I came home to place her at a convent school in Canada for 2 years, not dreaming that she had notions of lovers in her childish head," Everard Dawn continued gravely. "You see, sir, we have made other plans," said Arthur lightly, not taking him au sérieux. To his surprise, Mr. Dawn answered frigidly, "Of course, those plans made without my consent do not carry." Arthur began to grow excited by the portentous gravity of the other. He exclaimed, almost pleadingly, "Mr. Dawn, you do not surely mean that you will make me wait 2 years for Cynthia?" And to his utter horror and despair, the gentleman replied slowly, sadly, and gravely, as if every word cost him a pang, "No, I do not wish you to wait for Cynthia, Arthur Varian, for the truth may as well be known to you first as last, cruel as it must seem at first. Believe me, I am sorry for your disappointment, and I hope your fancy for Cynthia has not taken very deep root, for she can never be your wife." "Mr. Dawn!" Arthur Varian sprung to his feet and faced the speaker, with such a grief and amazement on his handsome face as might have melted the sternest heart. "Mr. Dawn, you cannot surely mean this refusal. What reasons could exist for deliberately wrecking 2 fond, loving hearts?" "Unfortunately, the reasons exist. But such as they are, I cannot explain them, Mr. Varian." Arthur cried out, eagerly, "If you are offended at my impatience to claim Cynthia for my own, I will agree to wait the 2 years you mentioned, or even more. Nay, so deep and constant is my love that I would rather serve 7 years for her, as Jacob did for Rachel, than lose the dear hope of winning her at last for my own." Everard Dawn rose from his chair, and grasping the back to still the great trembling of his frame, answered with passionate energy, "Arthur Varian, there can never be a marriage between you and my daughter. The fates forbid it. The unknown forces that control your life and hers cry out upon it. You must forget each other, for your love is the most ill-fated and hopeless the world ever knew. Arguments and entreaties are alike useless. You will believe that I am in terrible earnest when I tell you that I would sooner see my daughter dead than give her to you as a bride." "This is strange, passing strange, Mr. Dawn," the young man uttered indignantly, yet still not as angrily as might have been expected. A subtle something about the man, with his grave, sad, handsome visage, claimed his respectful admiration, in spite of the mystery that surrounded his rejection of his daughter's suitor. "It is strange, but true," answered Everard Dawn wearily, and he added, "Do not let us prolong this most painful conversation. Nothing can change the decrees of relentless fate." Arthur felt himself politely dismissed and turned toward the door. "You will at least permit me a parting interview with Cynthia," he murmured. "You must forgo it. It is better so. Tomorrow she leaves this place with me forever. Your 2 lives must never cross again." With a heart full of pain and anger and silent rebellion, the young man bowed and walked out of the house. But ere he reached the gate, he heard flying footsteps behind him and turned to greet Cynthia, bareheaded and breathless, her cheeks pale, the tears hanging on the curly fringe of her dark lashes. She clasped her tiny hands around his arm, reckless of her father's eyes watching disapprovingly from the window, and murmured, "Well?" "He refuses his consent, Cynthia, and says he will take you away tomorrow where we shall never meet again." "Arthur, you will never let him do it. You will not forsake me if you love me." Wildly, passionately. "My darling, you know I cannot live without you. Would you elope with me?" "Yes, yes," she began eagerly, but just then her father appeared at the door. "Cynthia, you must come in out of the cold," he called sternly, and Arthur said, "Go, my darling." Chapter 8. A Dark Secret. Cynthia did not obey. She only clung closer to her sorrowing lover. "Oh, Arthur, don't leave me. Take me home with you to your sweet, kind mother. I hate that man," she sobbed in wild abandon. Her father came down the walk toward them, and Arthur bent and whispered rapidly in her ear, "Go in with him now, my own sweet love, for we cannot defy him openly. We can only defeat him by strategy. Be brave, darling, for I will come for you and take you away tonight." He kissed her, in spite of Mr. Dawn's great eyes, and pushed her from him with gentle violence just as her father came out and took her hand. "Come, Cynthia," he said with gentle firmness, and she followed, though she shook off his touch as though it had been a viper. "Don't touch me! I hate you, she cried like a little fury, her eyes flashing fire. "Do you think I will go with you tomorrow? Never, never! You have made my life empty of joy, and now you envy the sunshine that love has brought me. But you shall not part me from Arthur. No, no, no!" And desperately sobbing, she flung herself face downward on the floor. He sought Mrs. Flint in terrible perturbation. "Come, she is in hysterics," he exclaimed anxiously. "I told you it would go hard with Cynthia," she answered curtly. "Yes, I feared she would grieve, but good heaven, she is a little fury, all rage and rebellion, swearing she will not go with me tomorrow. She must be closely watched today, for there is no telling what such a desperate girl may do," he said in alarm mixed with anger. "Pshaw! She will simmer down when her fit of crying is over. I'll get her upstairs and give her a soothing dose. Her temper fits never last long, for Cynthia is a good child after all, and I am sorry over her disappointment. She set such store by love," returned the old woman, in real sympathy for the girl and secret disapproval of his cold attitude to his neglected daughter. He felt the implied reproach and answered, in weary self-excuse, "Rebecca, I know you think me hard and cold, but my heart seems dead within me." "That is no excuse for neglect of duty," she answered with telling effect, as she went to the difficult task of soothing Cynthia and getting her upstairs to her room. "A bitter homecoming," he muttered, as he went out into the bleak morning air with its scurrying flakes of threatening snow to try to walk off some of his perturbation. Somehow, the dreary day dragged through to the drearier late afternoon. Upstairs, Cynthia lay still and exhausted upon the bed after such a day of tears and sobs and passionate rebellion as Mrs. Flint hoped never to go through again. Everard Dawn took his hat and greatcoat and set out for another long walk, this time in the direction of Arthur Varian's home. Had he repented his harshness? Was he going to recall Cynthia's banished lover? The air was keen with a biting east wind. The sky was gray with threatening clouds, and occasional light scurries of snow flew in his face and flecked his thick brown beard as he stepped briskly along, gazing over the low evergreen hedge at the beautiful grounds of the fine old estate he had refused for his daughter. As he almost paused in his walk to gaze with deep interest at the picturesque old stone house, he saw a lady come out of a side door and turn into an avenue of tall dark cedars that made a pleasant promenade, shutting off the rigorous wind very effectively. He followed her progress with wistful eyes and tense lips. It was indeed the stately mistress of the mansion. Wearying of its warmth and luxury, she had come out, wrapped in sealskin, for her favorite constitutional along the cedar avenue. She walked slowly, with her hands behind her, and her large flashing dark eyes bent on the ground, as if in profound thought. Everard Dawn gazed eagerly after Mrs. Varian till she was lost to view among the cedars. Then, searching for a gate in the hedge, he entered and turned his steps toward the avenue so as to meet her on her lonely walk. Slowly they came on toward each other, the echo of their footsteps dulled by the carpet of dead leaves, dank and sodden with last night's rain, and the face of the man, with its gleaming eyes and deep pallor, bore signs of unusual agitation. Suddenly, the lowering clouds parted, and a dull sunset glow sent gleams of light down through the cedar boughs upon the sodden path. The woman lifted her large, passionate orbs to the sky. Then she stopped short and uttered a startled cry. She had caught sight of the advancing man, the intruder upon her grounds. He removed his hat and stood bowing before her in the dying sunset glow, the light shining on his pallid face and the streaks of gray in his thick locks. "Mrs. Varian," he exclaimed. "Everard Dawn," she answered in a hollow voice, and her eyes glowed like live coals among dead embers, so ashy pale was her beautiful face. Pressing her gloved hand upon her side, as if her heart's wild throbbings threatened to suffocate her, she called hoarsely, "Why are you here? How dare you face me, traitor?" "I have not come to forgive you, Mrs. Varian, be sure of that," he answered sternly. "You do well to talk of forgiveness, you," she sneered, stamping the ground with her dainty foot. "And you, madam, would do well to crave it, not that it would ever be granted you, remember. Only angels could forgive injuries like mine." the man answered stormily with upraised hands, as if longing to strike her down in her defiant beauty. She did not shrink nor blanch, but her face was a picture of emotional rage, dead white against the setting of satin-black tresses and rich seal fur, her eyes flashing as only great Oriental black eyes can flash, and her rare beauty of form showing to advantage as she drew herself haughtily erect, hissing out, "Go, Everard Dawn, take your hated form from my sight, ere I summon my servants to drive you from the grounds." Turning, as if to put her threat into execution, she was arrested by a stern voice that said significantly, "It is more to your interest to listen to me one moment, Mrs. Varian." She whirled back toward him again, saying imperiously, "Be brief, then, Everard Dawn, for you should know that it suffocates me to breathe the same air with such as you." Evidently, there was some strange secret between this haughty pair, for he flashed her a glance of kindling scorn as he returned, "What I have to say needs but one sentence to assure you of its importance. Your son, Mrs. Varian, wishes to wed my daughter." A hoarse, strangled cry, and she fell back against the trunk of a tree, clasping its great bole as if to prevent herself from falling. Her face wore such a look of agony as if he had plunged a knife into her heart. Everard Dawn impetuously started forward, as if to catch her in his arms, the natural impulse of manhood at seeing a woman suffer. Then he suddenly remembered himself and drew haughtily back, waiting for her to speak again. But she was silent several moments, gazing at him with the reproachful eyes of a wounded animal at bay. Then she gasped faintly, Is she that Cynthia Dawn?" "Yes, Cynthia Dawn is my daughter," finished the unended sentence. "She lives here with my sister, and I came home last night, after being self-exiled for weary years, and found Arthur Varian and Cynthia plighted lovers. I have forbidden their love and sent him away, but they are defiant and rebellious. I shall take her away tomorrow, but in the meantime I came to you, for you must help me to keep them apart." Oh heaven, what is there I can do?" she moaned in piteous distress. He looked at her in dead silence a moment, then answered firmly, "Cynthia is only a tender girl, and I will not have her young life blasted with the hideous truth. Arthur is a man, and if the dark secret that comes between their love must ever be divulged, it is to him alone it need be revealed. Will you charge yourself with this duty should he persist in his resolve to marry Cynthia?" "If you asked me for all my fortune, I would rather give it you. But you are right. The duty is mine. I will not shirk it, though it slay me. Poor, poor Arthur." "That is well. I shall depend on you to curb his passion. Farewell, Mrs. Varian." And with a lingering glance, he turned away just as the last sun ray glimmered and faded in the west.